"Your Honor, this man changes air filters at night," the attorney said, loud enough for every bench in the courtroom to hear. Then she turned just slightly so the boy in the second row could hear it too. No fixed schedule, no predictable home life, no proof he was there when it counted. 9-year-old Theo Marsh stopped swinging his feet. Across the aisle, his mother's new family smiled. Owen Marsh did not. He did not object. He did not raise his voice. He only laid one worn folder flat on the table, with his thumb resting on a small hospital wristband no one else in that room recognized. Because his ex-wife had just sworn under oath that on the worst night of their son's life, Owen could not be found. And before that hearing was over, the same people who smiled at the word absent would hear one timestamp read into the record. After that, no one on their side of the courtroom would smile again. Stay with this one, because the word they used to shame him was about to come back across the room. Owen Marsh fixed the machines people only notice when they fail. Boilers, air handlers, hospital vents, the equipment that keeps rooms warm, clean, and breathing at 3 in the morning. 4 years earlier, right after the divorce, he had taken the overnight maintenance shift at St. Ansel's Children's Hospital. Nights paid more. Nights let him make the morning drop-off. Nights let him stand outside Theo's classroom with a lunchbox in one hand and coffee in the other, trying not to look as tired as he was. He was not a rich man. His truck had 200,000 miles on it. The back seat still had the car seat he had never taken out, even after Theo insisted he was too big for it. His ex-wife, Sloane, had married into the Vaughn family, into a house with a gate and a last name people recognized before anyone shook hands. At the last drop-off, Sloane did not look at him. Her new husband, Blake, glanced at Owen's work shirt and said, "The maintenance guy is here," like Theo was not standing between them. Owen looked down at his son. Theo pretended not to hear it. That was worse. 2 weeks later, Theo climbed into Owen's truck after school and asked the question no 9-year-old should have to ask. "Dad, if Mom moves, do I still come home on Sundays?" That was how Owen learned the move was not just an idea. A truck was already booked for Monday morning, and Sloane had filed to take Theo 3 states away and cut Owen down to 2 supervised weekends a year. In her sworn statement, she called Owen distant, unreliable, a father in name only. Then she wrote the sentence that made him sit down at the kitchen table and stop breathing for a moment. On the night Theo's asthma turned into an ambulance, she wrote, "Owen Marsh could not be reached." Owen read that line 4 times. Then he opened the kitchen drawer, took out the small plastic hospital wristband he had kept for 4 years, and started making copies. 2 nights before the hearing, a man in a good suit came to Owen's door. He was not from the court. He worked for the Vaughns. He placed one page on Owen's kitchen table and slid it across, gently, the way you slide money toward a man you expect to be grateful. Sign it and the debts disappeared. The legal fees, the late mortgage notices, the card he had maxed out keeping a roof over the car seat he still could not bring himself to remove. All of it gone, in exchange for one signature agreeing that Sloane could take Theo and Owen would step quietly aside. "You seem like a reasonable man," the man said. "Don't make this expensive." Owen picked up the pen. For 1 second, he let himself feel how light life could get if the red envelope stopped coming. Then his phone lit up with a voicemail he had never deleted. Theo's voice, smaller then, asking if they could get pancakes after his next weekend. Owen put the pen down. "I'll see you Friday," he said. He folded the offer in half and slid it into his jacket pocket. He carried it into the courtroom unsigned. By Friday morning, the Vaughns had filled their side of the room. Blake sat behind Sloane. Her mother sat beside him. 2 people Owen did not know whispered every time he opened a paper. Owen's side had 2 things on it, him and the folder. When he stood to speak for himself, in the good shirt he had ironed at midnight, The attorney did not let him finish one sentence. "With respect," she said, using the phrase the way some people use a knife, "this is not about who loves the child. It is about who can provide a stable life." Then she looked at Owen's work boots. "A boy needs a parent he can count on at dinner, not a man sleeping through daylight after a night shift." A soft laugh came from the Vaughn's side, not loud enough to get warned, just loud enough for Theo to hear. The attorney turned back to the judge. "And on the night this child was hospitalized, Mr. Marsh was not present. That is in the mother's sworn statement. The relocation is scheduled for Monday, Your Honor. This child needs certainty." There it was, the insult, the lie, the deadline, all in one breath. Owen looked back once. Theo was gripping the edge of the bench with both hands, the way a child holds on when the floor starts moving under him. For the first time that morning, Owen's jaw tightened. He turned to the attorney and said 5 quiet words. "Don't say that in front of him." Then he opened the folder. "May I show the court something?" Owen did not make a speech. He set one page on the table, not a stack, not a folder, one page. "That is the admission and consent form from St. Ansel's Children's Hospital," he said. "The night Theo could not breathe." The judge looked down. For the first time that morning, the attorney did not speak first. "Clerk," the judge said, "read the signature line." The clerk leaned closer. "Consent signed by Owen Marsh. Relationship father." The judge did not look away from the page. "Read the time." The clerk paused. 2:14 a.m. The room changed before anyone spoke. The woman who had laughed lowered her eyes. Blake Vaughn stopped leaning back. Sloane's mother stopped whispering with her mouth still half open. The attorney opened her folder, then closed it again. The judge lifted the form in one hand. "Mrs. Vaughn's statement says he could not be reached." Only then did Owen reach back into the folder. He placed the hospital visitor log beside the form. It showed him badged through the front desk at 1:52 a.m. and not badged out until morning. Then the nurse's note. The father stayed at the bedside. The mother was reached by phone. The mother was traveling. The mother did not arrive. Then his own time card from the hospital basement, clocked out from maintenance, went upstairs, signed consent, stayed until Theo's breathing settled. Owen looked at the judge, not at Sloane. "I was working 2 floors below him," he said. "When they called, I ran." No one on the Vaughn side made another sound. The court reporter typed, then stopped with her fingers still above the keys. The guardian ad litem, the woman appointed to speak for Theo, turned her chair a few inches away from Sloane and toward Owen. The attorney set her pen down. This time she did not pick it back up. In the second row, Theo let go of the bench. He sat up straighter, watching his father like he was seeing the part of the story no one had allowed him to hear. The judge held the consent form in one hand and Sloane's sworn statement in the other. For several seconds, she looked from the sentence to the timestamp. Then she looked at Sloane. "Mrs. Vaughn," she said, "your statement tells this court the father could not be reached that night." Sloane looked at the page. "He was working," she said. "That is not an answer," the judge said. "Were you told that night that Mr. Marsh had signed the hospital consent?" Sloane swallowed. "Yes." "Were you told he was at the hospital?" "Yes." "Then why does your sworn statement say he could not be reached?" Sloane did not answer. The judge waited. The whole room waited with her. Finally, Sloane looked toward the second row. "He was there," she said. The words came out smaller than before. "I knew he came. I did not put that in my statement." Theo stared at her. The judge turned to the attorney. "Counsel, are you withdrawing the characterization that Mr. Marsh was absent?" The word sat in the room like a stain. The attorney's voice was quiet. "Yes, Your Honor." "The clerk will note that counsel has withdrawn that characterization," the judge said. "It will not appear in this order." The clerk typed every word. Then the guardian ad litem stood. "Your Honor, Based on the records just admitted and the misstatement before the court, I ask to amend my recommendation." The judge nodded. "Proceed." The guardian looked at Owen first. "The record supports that Mr. Marsh has been a consistent caregiving parent. I do not support relocation on this showing." That was the moment the room fully turned. Not when Owen spoke. When the person appointed to protect Theo stopped looking at the Vaughns and put the truth on Owen's side of the room. Owen did not smile. He only nodded once, like a man setting down a weight he had carried so long his hands no longer knew how to open. The judge did not raise her voice. She did not have to. "The motion to relocate the minor child is denied," she said, looking across the room so no one could pretend they had not heard it. "The court finds that Owen Marsh was present during the medical emergency, that he has maintained consistent involvement, and that the proposed relocation is not in the child's best interest." Then she looked at the clerk. "Read the residential parent named in the amended order." The clerk read it clearly: Owen Marsh. For 1 second nobody moved. Then Theo spoke from the second row, in a voice too clear for a courtroom. "Read it again." The clerk looked at the judge. The judge nodded. "Owen Marsh," the clerk read again. And that name landed in the same room where, 1 hour earlier, people had smiled when someone called him absent. Afterward in the hallway, the attorney approached him without the smile she had used in court. "You could have asked for sanctions," she said. "You could have pushed harder on the false statement." Owen looked down at Theo, who was leaning into his side with one hand around the old wristband. Then he looked back at her. "You stood in there and told my son I was never there." The attorney said nothing. "I didn't keep those papers to punish anyone," Owen said. "I kept them so he would never have to wonder if his father came." That night, Theo fell asleep in the truck before they reached the second traffic light. The hospital wristband was still looped around his fingers. Owen drove home with the unsigned offer folded in his jacket pocket, the court order on the seat beside him, and his sons breathing soft and steady in the dark. He had not shouted. He had not needed to. The people who called him absent had to sit still while the record said his name, his signature, and the exact minute he showed up when his son could not breathe. Theo had heard a whole room question his father. Then he heard the court read his father's name twice. "So be honest with me. If they called you absent in front of your child, would you take the money and disappear, or make them read your name out loud? Tell me in the comments, and subscribe to The Overlooked Father for every parent who showed up when no one was watching.